Hey, it's Pastor Matt. I want to talk to you a little bit about light and dark today. It's day 3. We've been reading through the Gospel of John. That means we're reading chapter 3. And so hopefully you've read it already. If not, maybe some notes here in this video and some thoughts from me will help kind of get you into the text and understand some things. So once again, we've got 2 stories going on in this chapter. There's a conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus, and then there is a little dialogue about John the Baptist and his part in this story as John the author is telling us about it. So it kind of breaks into those 2 halves. Now, the conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus is the first conversation we get of a one-on-one nature. John's gospel highlights some of these conversations, and we're going to see several of them. This is the first one, and every time you're going to notice that there's kind of 2 perspectives going on. On the one hand, you've got somebody like Nicodemus in this case, who's got a very sort of earthly perspective and a picture of how the world works and also who God is, but it's all very kind of scripted in a certain way. And then Jesus has his side of things, and he's explaining things, and he has a slightly different perspective, and the roles don't work out quite the same way that the other person expects. And so we have Nicodemus asking questions, assuming a certain framework, if you will, and an understanding of who God is and how he works in the world. And Jesus, his answers don't fit all of Nicodemus' assumptions, and how the Spirit works is kind of a big part of that. And so that's really interesting to see in that conversation. It's interesting, I think, to reflect on the questions I bring to God. Do I limit how my God works? And do I expect certain things? And if so, do I expect those because God's told me to expect them? Or because I've built kind of this framework and scripted some roles, if you will, for how God works and how I work and how the 2 of us interact with each other? And then the second half of the chapter, it's John the Baptist, and the highlighted phrase there is really John saying, he must increase, speaking of Jesus, I must decrease. Because that's the role that John is playing right now. Remember, we talked about coming out of the prologue, how the camera angle sort of focuses in on John the Baptist as a beginning point of this storytelling. Well, now John the author is telling us that we're not going to see as much of the Baptist anymore. That the story has shifted, and we really sort of used John the Baptist's testimony to introduce Jesus, who is the center of this story. Now, a couple other things that show up that I think it's interesting in both halves of the chapter become emphasized because they're somewhat themes throughout John's gospel. One is this idea of belief in Jesus and belief in him as the Son of God. Jesus highlights that, of course, in John 3:16 and the verses right around that, telling Nicodemus that God so loved the world that he sent his Son, and really pointing to himself as, I am that Son. I am filling this role, and that's how it's to be understood. And then John the Baptist also referring to belief in the Son of God. So that's one part of it. There's also a big emphasis on the Spirit. And yes, I do have notes down there. So both conversations highlight the role of the Spirit, the work of the Spirit. Jesus really pointing to the maybe unpredictable nature of the Spirit. The wind blows wherever it wants. You can't see it, but you see what it affects and what causes come out of that. And in the same way, the Spirit moves around, and you're not going to see, and you're not going to be able to predict where the Spirit's at work, but you'll recognize where the Spirit's at work, and you'll get to see what comes out of the Spirit's work. So keep your eyes open for that. And John the Baptist also makes reference to the Spirit being sent by Jesus, and so it has that connection there. And then I'll kind of finish with this because it ties in with that prologue, that first section in chapter 1 of John's Gospel. Both of these sections make reference to the difficulty or the disconnect, if you will, between what God is accomplishing in this world and how the world receives it. Jesus uses these words. He says, the light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. That's his words in verse 19. And then we also hear John the Baptist make reference in a similar way. He bears witness to what he has seen and heard, yet no one receives his testimony, saying that the light has come, but the darkness will reject it. And Jesus comes speaking his words, and people will not listen to what he has to say, and they will reject that. And that is expected. It's been expected from chapter 1. Like I say, the prologue makes reference to that he came into the world, but his own people did not receive him, John says. And also that other phrase, the light has come into the darkness. The light is shown in the darkness. But John also says this, the darkness has not overcome it. I started the video in dark in the hallway over there. But you notice even on the video, and if you think about this, it's true every time in your own life. When darkness and light meet, which one wins? The light always wins. When darkness and light meet, the light always penetrates the darkness. The darkness never snuffs out the light. When the light shines, the light always brightens the area around it. And that's the promise of our God, and that's the work that he's doing. So even in this time where it's easy to find a lot of darkness, if you look through any news feeds lately, there's a lot of bad news, and there's a lot of difficult things. But the light shines in the darkness. The darkness has not and will not overcome that light. I want to invite you to do this today. In the comments section, if you're watching on Facebook, I want you to snap a picture or grab a link if it's something you've seen online. But snap a picture of something going on around you that shows the light shining through. Where are you seeing the light shine through for you at this time? And use that as a way to encourage some others. You can share it in the comments, and I know some of you have mentioned you're following from the links that I've sent via email, and you're not as active on Facebook, or you've had trouble getting on, or you just don't have a Facebook account. That's fine. Email me. Take a picture or grab a link from something online, or write out a sentence or two and send it to me, and I will post it for others so that they can be encouraged by that as well. It's one way that we can encourage one another as we follow Jesus together. Fantastic. I will see you tomorrow for John chapter 4.